Okay, this is a continuation from my last video. In one of my last videos, let's move that out of the way. In my last video, I showed you how you can use the web client in C# in order to access information from a web page. Now, if you need that link, you can just come to this URL here. So down the bottom there, I'll leave that on the screen for a few seconds for you to be able to see. And that shows you how to use the web client in order to be able to download information from a particular URL. So if I switch now across to my C#, this is the C# code that we developed last week. So you can see basically you've got a web client, which I've called client, and then the client is going to download from this URL a string that I've called string page code, and then it's going to put it into a text box. And so if I have a look at my form, there's the text box, and when I run my application, you can see that the form has opened up and it's downloaded the weather information in a format called JSON. And so what I'm going to do today is show you how to use C# to now break this JSON apart, because you can see that it's a long string that basically has a lot of weather information, and so you need to be able to break this down. Now, one way you can look at it is on the web. You can use online JSON viewers, and so you can see here I've used jsonviewer.stack.hu, and I've loaded this right there, this URL, into that viewer. And you can see that it's a little bit prettier here already in text format. It's broken it down into categories, but it also gives you this nice little viewer where the categories are further broken down into the parts of the JSON file. And so you can see that under this component here called main, there's a variable called temp, and that's the current temperature in Sydney, Australia. And so you can access the parts of the JSON file using this JSON viewer. Now we want to be able to access the parts within C#, and so I'm going to show you how to do that. Just when you do look at this viewer, you can see that some of the brackets are curly brackets and some of the brackets are square brackets. Where you see the square brackets, that generally means that it's a collection of items, whereas the curly brackets means that it's a group, so they're together there. They've just got the main temperature, the pressure, the humidity, and so on. Okay, so let's switch back to C# and we'll have a look at some code. So at the moment, once again, we've got our JSON coming down and it's loading into this variable which is called string page code. So what we're going to do now, code's running, let's stop it. What we're going to do now is add an extra library of code. You'll remember from when we first started using C# that you can add extra libraries of code or extra instructions into code, and we want to be able to use one from Newtonsoft, which is a JSON viewer, and it allows you to deserialize. So deserializing means to break that down into its parts. Rather than having one long string, it's going to break it down into components from the JSON file. So in order to add the Newtonsoft.Json package, right click on your solution and go to manage NuGet packages for this solution. And once you've opened up the NuGet solution, you want to go to browse. So at the moment you can see I've actually used this one before, so it's in my install, but you'll need to go to browse and then just search for Newton, and it will load in the Newton JSON package. So then you want to select that package, and over here tick the boxes to download it and then install it. You can see my option is to uninstall because I've already got it there. So once you've installed that, it will download those extra packages of code, those extra libraries of code, and that means you'll then be able to use them in your own code. Okay, so now let's jump back to my code. So first thing we have to do is tell the project that we're actually going to use it. So if we just start typing up the top in our namespaces where we define which namespaces we're using. So I've just written after system.net, I've said using, and we're going to use Newtonsoft.Json and finish that with a semicolon. And so that's going to add our that namespace to our code, which means we can use all of the commands that are available in that namespace. Now, so the first thing we're going to have to do is create an object where we where we can load the interpreted version of this string. So at the moment we've downloaded the file and put it in this string. Now we have to interpret that or deserialize that and store it somewhere. So we're going to use a new type of variable which is a dynamic object. So dynamic, and let's just call it DOBJ for dynamic object, and that's going to be equal to JSON convert dot, and then we want to deserialize our text, so we're going to go deserialize object right there, and we want to deserialize it as a dynamic object, and then we have to tell it what we're actually going to deserialize. So that's our string page code. And so what that line is going to do is it's going to take that string, it's going to deserialize it into a dynamic object, and then it's going to store it into the variable called DOBJ, dynamic object. Okay, now we want to get the part of it. So I just want the temperature. So now we've got all of those parts. You'll remember if I switch back here, we've got all of these parts now stored as separate components within our dynamic object. So jump back to C#, and now we want to look at just one part. So we're going to get a string, we're going to call it temp for temperature, and it's going to be equal to the DOBJ, and then we have to refer to the part, main, and it's the temperature variable, and let's make that go to a string. Okay, so what we've done now, if we look at our C# here, we've said that that JSON object, we're looking at the main, we're looking at the temperature, so the main temperature, and it's 13.97, so our value should be 13.97. And so this is taking that main temperature, putting it into a string, and then storing that in a variable called temp. And rather than showing the whole string from our download, all we're going to do in our text box is show the temperature, just to show this is working. So now when we run our code, it should go and get the JSON file from that URL, and there we go. It's put 13.91 into our text box, and so that has downloaded the code from this website, put it into a JSON object, deserialized that into components, and then looked at just the one component we want, which is the main temperature variable, stored that in a variable called temp, and then displayed that on the screen. Alright, so hopefully this will help you with your assessment task as you're using an application to access a web service and then display that on your application.